Welcome to the show, everyone. Today we have Aaron Bear, who is the author of Exponential Theory. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Vijay. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Very excited to talk to you today. I mean, just looking at your profile, your background is in entrepreneurship, unicorns, and leadership, and thinking big, and just exponential everything. So let's hear your story.
Well, I think we all have roughly the same amount of heartbeats and time on this planet. So I started thinking, what's the best way to spend that time? And ended up being about thinking big. And so I started studying some of the biggest thinkers in the world, and over the last 15 years, have really culminated into this book, Exponential Theory, that is the power of thinking big, and really sharing, how these people have thought big about their lives and impacted in a very big way. So been excited to kind of pull all that together and come to exponential theory. And then we created a course called Exponential Mindset, Beliefs, and Attitudes. And we have a group coaching program called Exponential Leaders, which we all, under the title of 1 million exponential leaders, is our own exponential goal here. Is we want to create 1 million exponential leaders that then will solve all the exponential problems in the world, so that we can, basically get to a better place and be part of that. So that's really the vision of 1 million exponential leaders.
That's really cool. So let's back up a little bit to the thinking big part. That's
Yep.
so vague, but I'm curious about what that means to you.
Yeah. So I think, there's some exercises that we have to kind of remove some of the small stuff. And I'm sure there's a book called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff out there that was famous probably 15 years ago. And candidly, a lot of that falls away when you start thinking bigger. And that, part of our process is, looking at the past and seeing what are the limitations or regrets, or, where did we learn something? How do we unlearn that behavior? Or where were we programmed, to be, where we're at today? And candidly, we're all where we're supposed to be. We realize all of our decisions, or all of the inputs or environments that we put ourselves in, and trauma that we exposed ourselves to, or that we were exposed to, kind of comes with us to where we're at. Now, how we deal with that, allows us to think about the future. In the future, often we have stress, worries, anxieties, doubts, fears about the future. That part of that is all from it's a learned behavior. A lot of it's learned from people that we're surrounded by our parents, maybe by our upbringing. So part of our process of helping people think big is really to understand, where did we learn to think small? And there was a time maybe when we were, maybe 4, 5, 6, or 7, that we just thought big about the world. Like we could create anything we wanted that day. And for different people listening to this podcast, it's going to be at different times in their lives. But there was a day that, if we can think back to that, where we just, we were allowed to create anything we wanted to. Somewhere along the line, we came in this belief system that we weren't able to do that anymore. So we coach to get back to that place, so that people can actually think big about their lives and understand that equally, we are all put on this planet with equal potential and equal opportunity. I think it really starts between the ears. There's a bunch of other stuff that holds us back, generationally, systemically, different things that can really, we can use as excuses or barriers. And, we see people break through, and we love those breakthrough stories of the people against all odds, whoever they are, have, triumphed and created their own hero's journey to march on to success. And part of that is, being your own hero, to really create the success in your future that you want, and to think big about the world that you want to think big about, and create that day by day.
Got it. So when you mentioned thinking big, the first thing that comes to my mind is Grant Cardone's 10X movement. And so it's basically taking what your goal is, 10X it. And what are your thoughts on that? Is that thinking big, or do you have a different criteria for thinking big?
No, in the book, we define that. And I actually used to own the domain 10X ROI. He owns it now. So, we had a very similar thought process in that. But reality is, when I go in and work with companies, a lot of times, they're shooting for 10% gains. And what I share with them is, these exponential companies, they're shooting for 10X gains. And with that thinking, they may fall short. And in the book, I even use Elon Musk, which may be one of the greatest exponential thinkers that today is causing quite the stir of acquiring, almost 10% of Twitter. But in his thinking, he has Mars shots, and I'm sure you've heard of Google having moon shots. Well, Elon Musk said, I'm going to think bigger than, anyone on this planet. So he literally puts a goal out there for 2040, which there are no other CEOs that are putting goals out there for 2040. But he realizes that exponential goals take a while to progress. And part of that, Bill Gates, can say that taught us the world this in 1976, said I was going to put a computer in every desktop in every home. And everybody's like, what are you talking about? There's hardly any computers in the workplace. Well, now he underestimated that, where there's a computer in every pocket. I think Elon Musk, with Tesla's goals and everything, he always was very long term, knowing that another quote by Bill Gates that kind of ties these together is, we often overestimate what we can do in 1 year, but underestimate what we can do in 10 years. So when you're thinking exponentially, it's not thinking today that even your success or failure, and if you look at an exponential curve, that it kind of moves up. Part of that learning that process is to understand there's a long period of deception that you have to continue to work through that. Elon Musk may be one of the most criticized people until 2 or 3 years ago. And then he obviously overcame that, where Tesla was able to deliver on some of their promises and become the most valuable car company in the world, actually more valuable than the 5 competing car companies in the world at one time. So you see this, if you have this longer term vision, which we have a whole chapter on long term thinking. Jeff Bezos has it. He was able to retrain analysts to think about Amazon long term, and now all these stocks that are trading, at the $1 trillion market capitalization, are really all just were ideas 20 years ago. They've now kind of fulfilled on their promise of being exponential companies because their founders thought bigger. So when you look at that and you look at the day to day how people spend time, it really gets easy to see, how someone, and even like Elon Musk taking action, like a couple weeks ago tweeted, what if I started my own social network that didn't censor? And then he's like, well, why don't I just buy the one that's out there because it's undervalued? And now that, Twitter's kind of bounced on the stock price there. Now, Elon Musk, is a man of action, but it really does show, those that think, not many of us can do that, but not very long ago, he wasn't able to do that. So I think, in his own mind, he knew he would be there, or he just believed that he would be there. And he had the mindset, belief, and attitude to get there. So that's where, uncovering these stories of the limitation that we all have. Not one of us doesn't have some story that holds us back. But if we can overcome those stories and start to write our own, it becomes very easy to create 1 million exponential leaders, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So for the rest of my life, I'm going to be working on that big goal. And, luckily I got to talk to you, Vijay, early on in this process. So I'm in that deceptive phase where there'll be a lot of people say he'll never do that. Yet the beauty is I can always work on it, and I may succeed. I may underestimate myself, like a Bill Gates or an Elon Musk, but having that vision and that thought to just say, hey, I want to create that. Now I'm off to the races.
That's amazing. That's inspiring. I mean, you are talking about people who didn't think big enough, but then they did, and they actually accomplished their goals. So that's incredible. Now, what are some characteristics you see when you're studying some of these exponential thinkers? What is something that's common among all of them, or something that you think they don't have shared among all of them?
Yeah, I think, well, they don't have patience, and that's where they continue to be determined and persistent in their goals. And again, with that, unrealistic. All of them would, you could take Steve Jobs, you could take, you know, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, even Sergey Brin and Larry Page, and you take some of these leaders that have found their exponential future, unrealistic in some of their expectations, because candidly, when you look at some of the greatest inventions, they really sound, they don't sound, I have a friend, Richie Norton, who wrote a book called The Power of Starting Something Stupid. And what the meaning is like, uh, Fred Smith, who created FedEx, got a C minus on his paper, because he's like, well, I'm going to fly every package into Memphis in the middle of the night and then back out the next day. And the teacher's like, well, that's not a really reasonable business plan. And back in I think it's in the late 70s, early 80s, he did that. And now we, have expectations for 40 years later, our packages get there on time because of FedEx. And then, you see the same thing with Vanguard Group. John Bogle, who created index mutual funds, went against all the trends to create a no-load mutual fund. It's now the largest mutual fund asset class, over $7 trillion or $8 trillion. So, you see these big ideas, they don't necessarily start big. In fact, Google, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, within about a year or two into the company, they're like, well, we don't have a business model. Excite wants to buy us for $1 million. Maybe we should just sell it for $1 million because we're in this PhD and we want to do really big things. So thank God that they accidentally stumbled into this business model. And now, Google, like everyone, has graduated and created Alphabet because they realized they outgrew their own purpose of organizing the world's information. Now they're actually into robotics and home automation and, really pushing the way with the exponential thinking. And if you think of all these companies, the one thing that we have that's so certain, in my professional role, I've been a innovation facilitator, which I've worked with board of directors at companies like Daimler and Coca-Cola and Belfius Bank, the National Bank of Belgium. And we've taken those organizations into Silicon Valley, Singapore, Shanghai, and look at these innovation ecosystems. The one thing that you see when they get there is you realize is that everyone in these startup ecosystems are working faster and they're winning the war on talent because they think bigger. So then a company that sounded so glorious to work for, say 20, 25 years ago, like a Mercedes-Benz or Daimler, is losing the talent war to an autonomous car company that's actually doing something very, very innovation. So the people are like, well, this is going to be bigger. And now, we have proof points of, Tesla doing that. And now we've seen all these other electric vehicle car companies raise, billions of dollars and get into a space that was unheard of, to break into, as far as we haven't had any new car companies really since the 50s. And now we just have a slew of new ones because candidly, the big ones hadn't adjusted as quickly as they needed to. And I've been having that conversation with these global automobile manufacturers for the last 5 or 6 years. But now you realize is like they're going to play catch up for a while, and they lost this opportunity of, really being a leader in the electric space if they just embraced it. So it's interesting to see, the little guys actually beating up on the big guys, because no matter what, you have a company like a Daimler, Mercedes-Benz that were number one in everything they did. They were the best. And, German engineering and all these different things globally. And then you take them around the world and they realize is they're number one in nothing. In every category, there's another company actually outperforming them, outcompeting them. And I think that's the beauty of the free market is the cost to start something has been driven way down. So if you can win the war on talent and start attracting people to think big about something, and that's all I'm doing with 1 million exponential leaders, is we will find people that really want to, love exponential leadership, and they'll be attracted to that, and they will join our coaching program. They'll end up maybe being a coach. They'll end up making a living doing this. They'll be working around big ideas. That's our goal in our own mission with 1 million exponential leaders. And that's why we actually renamed our company that just in the last, you're actually the first podcast I've announced that on. So we're moving towards that huge goal by telling our story and even naming our company that, because that's the vision we have.
Awesome. Well, I'm honored I'm the first podcaster announcing that too. Backing up a little bit, you mentioned the war on talent, and even before that, you said when we're kids, we all have this exponential mindset, but then somehow we lose it. At what stage do we lose it, and what are some steps we could take to get it back?
Well, I think it just goes to our school system. Our school system was built to create workers, and to report on time, not question authority, do all these things. And if you think the hierarchy that we have in our school system, we really beat the creativity out of kids. No matter where you're from, some places more than others, some school systems more than others. But the reality is the ability to make kids that are generally playful and creative and say, no, do this and that. There's reasons for some of it. Societal conformity is probably one, but it's a systemic issue as far as how our next generation of innovators generally rebel against that. And candidly, I wasn't a very good student. I graduated in the bottom half of my high school class. I ended up going on to college and getting straight A's because it's like, okay, I don't want to. I had a soccer scholarship, didn't want to lose the opportunity. It wasn't about brains; it was just about interest, and it was about forcing. So the rebel came out in me. I've always been one to kind of buck the trend, but with that, beyond the elementary school system through high school, and then even we get to college and even into our master's programs, like the MBA. I was a teacher in MBA programs for 10 plus years. And the MBA, candidly is an outdated, you know, structure where we really are just promoting people to go to middle management. So if you want to conform and, know accounting and all these different things that you do to report to others. And, so our whole school system's been built to really, put us in the middle of society, but not to put us as leaders. And that's where I even created the X MBA, one to sound like an MBA, but it's really about mindset, beliefs, and attitudes. It's about creating leaders for the next generation because right now there's 35 exponential technologies coming to market that are mixing up every single industry. And as you merge some of these different technologies and you apply them to new industries, we have this game we play doing that. Then you start like really seeing the potential and the opportunities of where you can, like, different industries. Like journalism is a very easy one to pick on because they were first disrupted. Now we're, you can see is that people get their news from different places. They learn, from podcasts and all these different things where it's literally been democratized. And that's part of a process of exponential. Is the end is democratization. It starts with digitalization. There's a deceptive phase, then you get to a disruptive phase, then you dematerialize and demonetize, and finally democratize. And I think that's what we even see in the social movements today, where for far too long a very few people have had the power. And now we can honestly see that shift where the masses have the power, where doing the right thing is going to be demanded, and transparency and growth is all part of our exponential leadership. Is we even created. I'm sure you heard the golden rule is to treat others as you would want to be treated, and then there's the platinum rule, maybe you've heard of, was treat others as they would want to be treated, which I think is demanded today with Me Too and all these different movements that we realize is for far too long what we think is acceptable may not be acceptable to other people. And then I actually, on top of that, created a new rule called the rhodium rule, which rhodium is made of platinum. So you got this built-in rule of, and the rhodium rule is to think about the entire ecosystem. So when you're making a decision, you have to think about the environment. You have to think about, think about your shareholders, but you have to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You have to think about the greater good of whatever your organization is selling to. How does your organization represent that, look like that, get feedback, and such? So that's part of exponential leadership, that when you look at these leaders of these big technology companies, they're embracing this more and more, as far as, because they realize that they are looking out at the world and saying, this is our customer base. We need to figure out how we look like our customer base. Otherwise, we're actually missing opportunity for profit. And that's where doing the right thing now is kind of starting to prove that it's actually the right business model as well for the future. So that's part of our, as you get into Exponential Leaders coaching program, we pair people up into similar industries or different industries that really think big and can challenge each other in a way where it's really a peer-to-peer driven coaching program to really drive people to the biggest success they can by challenging each other to think bigger and bigger, processing issues where some of the small stuff goes away because you just start thinking as big as possible. So hopefully that gives you your answer, Vijay. I know it's a lot.
Yeah, no, that definitely does, and that's a really interesting concept, the rhodium rule. I've never heard of that. And you said you created that?
Yeah, it's actually, I can claim that one. I can claim Mars shots. I created the word thrivability, which there's sustainability and these different words, but it's like, let's think about thrivability. How do we actually create something that goes beyond sustainability so that it thrives, and that's the whole ecosystem thriving. This idea of Mars shots, beyond moon shots. Honestly, Elon Musk challenging to say he's going to go to the moon in 2040 and make a settlement is a Mars shot. Like, if he fails, which we don't know, well, he's already shuttled passengers back and forth to the International Space Station. He's already doing things that a private space company was never thought of doing. because he won the war on talent, because people went to him, because like who wants to be part of a small idea? We want to be part of something bigger than ourselves. We want to be part of a movement. I think it's this idea that you start to see is we are more driven on purpose today than anything, because candidly profit has always let the generations before us down. And candidly, I think of we're actually starting to learn that time's more valuable than money, and how you spend it. And I think that's part of being exponential is most of these exponential leaders. And it's, I have a universal principle I talk in the very beginning of our book called What You Resist Persist. They didn't drive out. None of these people really were money driven. They literally became billionaires, and potentially Elon Musk being the first trillionaire because he wanted to solve big problems. At the end of the day, he treats money as a tool. And it's not to say that he may not be somewhat driven by money, but you can see that he's like, really driving, to solve like very big problems in different industries, including, what he's done this week in Twitter, which is going to be fascinating to watch over the next several months to see what happens there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really like how you brought up the purpose side of why people join companies like Tesla and other forward thinkers. How does that tie into the leadership aspect of these companies? What are some qualities that leaders have to attract great talent?
Yeah, so Salim Ismail wrote a book called Exponential Organizations, and he was formerly president of Singularity University, where I was entrepreneur in residence. That's in Silicon Valley on NASA's campus, teaches exponential leaders. So I was surrounded by these big thinkers for, a good half of that time the 15 years that I was writing this book. So in that, the thinking big part of really helping those people see the future is creating a massive transformative purpose. And that's the one variable that they found in every exponential organization. There's nine others, there's actually 10 other variables beyond that. But the one variable that is woven through that is this massive transformative purpose. And once you can get this idea that's so big that seems unreasonable, like for me to say 1 million exponential leaders, that I'm going to create 1 million exponential leaders, it seems an unreasonable thing to say. But the beauty of it is I can continue to work on that for a long time to reach that. And as the exponential curves, I'll likely pass that up sometime in my lifetime. And I've built other programs that actually have impacted 1 million people. I've built software systems that put 20 million people on it. So I know that it's possible. And that's where my focus there is, as you create these exponential leaders, what you need to help them do is create massive transformative purposes for whatever they want to solve. And the UN sustainable goals, there's 17 of them out there right now, that if you look at these sustainability goals of how do we improve the world and how do we improve equity and how do we improve poverty and all these different things, there are people working on all those. Candidly, what's going to take is not necessarily just the nonprofits working on to solve these problems and I'll consider that like a Band-Aid way of doing it. Like, let's solve the short term. But it's the exponential thinkers to actually create a thrivability of those systems so that you see that you don't have these problems, that we're thinking bigger than those problems. And that's, problems with the tens of millions of refugees out there. I mean, there's all these different things that seem so big to solve. We'll slowly be able to wrap our head around those as more and more exponential leaders start to think about that. And that's our goal of 1 million exponential leaders, is that we end up solving, we're part of solving so many different problems because we have this fundamental premise that, as you think bigger and you challenge yourself to, even push yourself to the next level and what you want to do and accomplish, there's nothing, candidly, it's just a matter of there's no more energy put into thinking bigger than there is thinking smaller. So it's a matter of getting everybody's purpose aligned with that massive transforming purpose, which is really the biggest thing to be an exponential leader. That's where it begins, is creating something that seems so unrealistic that a lot of people doubt you, and you revel in that confidence and overcome. You get more confidence from that, and you overcome that. And that's part of our coaching program. We have that built in, because there's always going to be a lot of naysayers, and honestly, family and friends are going to be the biggest ones, because they're going to look at you like you're crazy. Like, you think you can impact the world like that? And damn right I do.
That's great. I really liked what you said. It's the same amount of effort to think big as it is to think small. So why not think big? I think that's really powerful.
Well, I'd even go further, Vijay, is to say it probably takes more energy to think small than it does to think big, because you then get caught up in this vicious conversation, and you probably see it. I still see it in family members of mine and different people, where you realize is like their ability to think small just creates exponentially more little problems for them. Where candidly, I'm not worried about those things. I'm worried about, like, how do I make an impact of leaders on this podcast? And if one person thinks bigger from listening to we've both probably done the world an amazing, we've done a great thing, whatever the problem they solve, and they go off and do it because they start believing in themselves. They get the mindset, belief, and attitude to do it. Then I feel like this was the best time I could possibly spend doing that. And that's where the rest of all these other things that you could think about what I could be doing today, it all falls by the side. My true purpose guides me in what I do. So I don't really get, the other little small stuff that everybody's sweating. I let that kind of just take care of itself. So
That's great. In some of your work, you mentioned something called unlearning. Could you talk about unlearning and why it's important for humans?
yeah, so I think, and this goes, I've done a lot of work. I have a foundation called Hirazona Foundation that I started with a business partner, Alan A.P. Powell. And we created a program called the Bridge Forum. And the Bridge Forum works with the Black community and law enforcement and really bridges the gap. We started it back in 2014 when Ferguson and Baltimore, and it was really the first uprisings of community against law enforcement. And what we realized is, as we went and talked to a bunch of different groups on both sides and really kind of paired these conversations, is in the end, they all want, everybody wants safe communities, that aren't terrorized either by police or the community, or there's not this friction between the two. But in that, you learn that there's a lot of trauma to be unlearned, and we can systemically take it back 400 years to slavery. And there's a lot of trauma built in that's called epigenetics, that we might not know the cognitive biases that we approach a situation, either from a law enforcement or from a community standpoint. So this kind of led, we've done this since 2014. So we've been having bridge forums like once a month, or even greater than that, in cities like Louisville, which, Indianapolis, places that have high intense environments in this situation. And we've done it here in Phoenix, Arizona, and different places. But through this, what I have learned most is people's learned behaviors of how they approach situations. We need to step back. And what we did with law enforcement, for example, we were able to change 29 laws because we recognized that there were racial biases built into them. And part of that was learned behavior from different eras and different times that is not acceptable today. And that's where, like, the system is built against certain people. And part of that is then also unlearning on both sides, that if you think about the limitations, and I'll make it simpler, I was wanting to see like a systemic level. As you can see, like, there's these issues. But then if you get down to the professional or the personal level, everybody approaches something because they learned it and they were told something, whether it's, we often heard about the talk, and the talk creates barriers, from a Black community. We often would hear about organizations and how they approach a certain situation, or who they would communicate with. So we were able to kind of bridge this gap with this bridge forum. But what we learned is that there was a lot of reprogramming and unlearning on both sides to understand that there wasn't as much pent up frustration. And candidly, the media has probably played the biggest role in manufacturing, because what bleeds leads, and violence and everything, is to really get into our subconscious. And that's why you look at presidential elections and fake news and everything today. I have a whole chapter about this in my book Exponential Theory, that really dissects, we are in doom scrolling, as we scroll, and we just get further and further depressed because of cancel culture or compare culture, and this or that, or you can't do this, or hey, this person, everybody's putting on their best face, why can't I look like that? So there's all these issues of that we need to unlearn and reprogram. I think that's the first step in my process as I own part of a neuroscience company that does mental health, and I've learned a ton about mental health. And I think we're in a mental health crisis right now, largely because of social media, largely because we're always on and we're not able to kind of, break away. And exponential thinkers are, candidly, to be an exponential thinker, you need not to be inundated and burdened by all this noise. The only way you can break through and start solving bigger problems and actually attack some of these problems within these areas. And we see this every day. We see people solving these problems. We see that we're in a better world today. And I think it's an injustice to say all the progress that we've made and all the people that have done things in this world to make it a better place. There's people that are unfortunately uncomfortable with change that we've got to figure out, how do we actually get people to understand, well, this change is necessary for all people. And I think that goes to a bigger conversation around thinking big. Getting people to a purpose is to understand, okay, how do we actually think bigger about every single problem that we're approaching? And that goes to this rhodium rule. And I take it when I go into a situation is, how do I think about you know all the different stakeholders in the ecosystem? Because whatever we do, if we make one decision, it does affect the environment. So we can do better, regardless. I don't my book is very much lays out, around climate change and different things. And I know there's probably some listeners out there that don't believe in climate change. Well, even if you don't, we can do better about protecting our environment than we are now. And I think that's the point of how I approach the ecosystem is, we can do better, treat people better. There's no way we can't do things better in every area that we're looking at. And I think what ultimately exponential theory comes down to is that people become more conscious as they actually think bigger, because they actually think about more than themselves. And I think if you look at the extremes in our society, they're often focused about themselves or their family, and they're very isolated and they're not worried about anything else. And that's where you can look at rural vote versus urban vote. There's a very different demographic there. But in the end, we have to, if we don't start thinking bigger, it actually will cause everyone those problems. So we'll have repercussions from not thinking about that. And I think that's the part of the systemic thinking that we need to have. And that's part of thinking bigger and being more exponential, that I believe we need a 1 million exponential leaders to actually make an impact on a billion people. And that's really my ultimate goal, is like to impact a billion people. Because if you start thinking big about these things, then you'll start solving these issues that maybe I'm not capable of, but I could maybe we create 20, 30 different movements to solve different little, smaller exponential problems that, impact whatever. But in essence, that's, how I kind of look at the world, is how do you actually take a step back to understand that every decision you make impacts more than just you or the other person. And unfortunately, we had a president or a former president that, whether he liked his policies or not, did not think about all the people that a policy would affect. Maybe had good policies and in some of his, policies, but in the end, polarized the nation and candidly left us in a place where we had conspiracy theory and, a whole bunch of other issues. So I won't get political. I'm sure you don't want to get political. So I know
No,
I
thank you
touched
so
on
much
it.
for that. My next question was not to get political, but let's actually talk about it from as unpolitical as possible. If there is a leader that you don't necessarily agree with what they are, I guess some of their values, how can you apply the exponential theory? Or let's say, what are some qualities of good leaders? Let's just go with that.
Well, I'll get this, because I think the rhodium rule is a big thing about this. Is I think if you're wanting to create change, what we need to do is not force change. And part of it is if you look at through history, these figures that have basically created a world of exponential thinking. They've really done this by thinking bigger. They slowly think bigger and bigger. And the exponential theory in that is taking these ideas, where you have to have empathy for all people. And this may be the hardest thing ever, but you take Abraham Lincoln, you take Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, Mother Teresa. At some point, there was a point in their life they didn't have the empathy that they ended up when they actually overcame, I guess you would say, being the victim and actually said, I'm in charge of my world and I'm going to create the change that I see in the world. Um, they were able to apply this. And that's where, regardless politically, is thinking empathy. How do I empathize with the other side? Because, people are resistant to change because they haven't ever had change and they've always had a certain thing. Part of that is just to understand and recognize that as you have the conversation so that you can get them to think bigger about the world or about themselves and bring them along instead of saying you're wrong. In the reality of the world, I have in the beginning of the book of one of my universal principles is, to think is to create. We're always right, because whatever we believe, and that's part of where social media is polarizing us because once we read 5 articles, we think that we know the truth. The reality is, truth is a blurry line today, where it's always been a blurry line, candidly in media, but more so today because we're filtered by the algorithms that we get our news and by our friends and all these things. So we've been polarized. In that, we've got to learn to look at the other side and understand why they're in their position for us to even overcome that. And that's where I choose these great leaders. If in my exponential mindset, beliefs, and attitudes, they all at one time, overcame these thoughts by, really empathizing to understand, we have to be better than our enemy. And that's a tough one. And it's also one that we've seen throughout history has proven that change does work when you can get people to actually empathize on both sides. And I think that's part of the rhodium rule is the if it has a platinum rule built into it is to think how others would want to think, is creating that empathy, creating that emotional intelligence, which I think today part of the XMBA program really guides people around that, because you can handle a lot of situations with words and not let them escalate or blow up. And I used to run the National Association of Sales Professionals. So I learned sales and influence and persuasion and negotiation. And all that led me back to, okay, you can solve bigger problems by actually communicating and thinking about the other side than you can thinking about your own side. And I think that's part of the rhodium rule, is to think about all the different stakeholders and honestly synthesize that and make the decision for everyone. And the decisions aren't always going to be perfect. And that's the point, is that we have to make decisions. We have to make mistakes without being canceled. We have to learn things. We have to accept people apologies and go on. The media has stepped in to really cancel anyone that says anything on the normal. Candidly, they're the greatest learning opportunities. It kind of goes to my philosophy about really, winning or learning instead of, losing. I think there's a point of failure. The only time you fail is if you don't win or learn. And the reality is, eventually you should win or learn. Sometimes it takes, some knuckleheads a lot more times than others to actually learn something. But in the end, if we can have the whole world learn why this is the right thing to do, that's more important than being right in the and making someone, canceling someone or making something, you know, and I think we see it every, regardless if it's Will Smith and Chris Rock, or, there's now camps of people that believe one, who's right, who's wrong, and it's crazy. We all want to pass judgment, yet the real opportunity there is that we can learn from that situation. And I think there's some valuable learnings in there, and we can actually, apply those and make sure that that situation never happens again. Will we do that? I'd say the majority of people won't. Exponential thinkers will do that. It's like, I'm not going to put myself in that situation, and maybe either of them, and to be candid. So it's thinking through that, is like, what are the repercussions of your actions, are part of that rhodium rule. So that, hopefully that addressed it in a roundabout way. I kind of came full circle on that, but I think it's important for people to consider all sides of the story, because no matter what, if anybody sees, there's always two sides of the story, and they're never exactly the same.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. A question that came up with what you're speaking about is, how do you encourage others to have the exponential mindset? People are just so, in my words, narrow-minded or don't have the growth mindset. How do you get that spark so they can get on this journey for exponential thinking?
I think part of it is talking about, and this goes when I start off is talking about people's past, what led them to here. And once you stop becoming a victim, and once you start realizing that, oh wow, I made every decision to get to wherever you are in life. And that's me. I could say I never thought, being 47 years old, that I'd be here, what I'm doing right now, but I couldn't be happier than I am, because now I take responsibility for that. It took me, I was one of those knuckleheads. It took me 20 years to learn some of these things. And now I want to share it. Like I even tell some of my inner circle, I'm like, well, I want to teach you what took me 20 years in 2 years. It's a lot to learn. Don't get me wrong, because I've been on this mission and path to get to where I'm at, to be able to create every day, to get back to literally when I was 4 years old, that I used to walk outside and like, what am I going to do today? And just be a kid that I can, go play and exercise and understand I manage my energy, and I manage, who I love and who I spend my time with. And, my work is just my purpose. So like every day is just full of joy and happiness and creating these experiences versus, it's not what happens to me. Difficult things will happen to me. It's just, how do I handle those? So, it's part of that journey. But I think it goes back to empathy and these different things, is helping people, find the path where they start to learn, okay, I need to be responsible. The first thing is they have to take responsibility for where they are. And that's hard. And that becomes brutally hard, in some of the subjects that I was talking about earlier, to say, the system's built against me and these are the things. And yeah, it may be. We all can obviously adopt more problems if we want more problems. We can adopt more trauma and more issues. And that's where you can take two people that have been through the exact same circumstances, and depending on their mindset, belief, and attitude, they'll have completely different outcomes. And we've seen this. They did a study of twins, and it really is just how people had the same situations happen to them, but one was glass half empty, one was glass half full. And it's like, okay, what can I learn from this? What can I, how can I apply this? Versus like, this is just typical for me and I'm screwed and da da da. And it's that self-talk that really becomes, it's very easy to have a conversation. And whenever I meet someone that's first a coaching client, or they meet, I literally get in their head, because I'm like, well, I know you're probably having a different conversation right now. What is that conversation? Because it's probably the one that it's going to you're wasting my time if that conversation is more important than the one you're having with me. So it's to your point. I think the departure is actually getting everyone to the present moment. Is if we can get people to the present moment, one, the bigger thing is, once you're on the path, and this keeps coming, as people are afraid of success, or people are afraid of failure, or people won't make decisions. And that all is a made up system. I say it's all made on fear, false evidence appearing real, because they've learned that by seeing someone else fall down or whatever. And the reality is, their doubt, their worries, their stress, their anxiety is all made up from an environment that they sit in now. If we just get someone to the present moment, you have none of that. So if every day you just keep centering yourself, and that's where meditation and exercise and all these good sleep, all these little kind of micro habits, get someone into the exponential mindset, then you can say, okay, well, I can create bigger today. And Navy SEAL, part of Navy SEALs, their goal is to improve 1% a day. And if they do that, they're 37x improvement in a year. And that just shows you exponential curve is just continually, and that's the one thing that you see, this determination, you see this long-term vision, there's persistence to actually get there. That becomes easier when you're living in the moment and you actually enjoy the journey. The reality is, our society's kind of been built off of this instant gratification, that I need something now and I need a reward. We all get trophies and all these different things. Is the trophy is actually enjoying the process, and enjoying the learning, enjoying practice. As the great coach John Wooden said, I want you to master practice, because then the games will be easy. And spending your time literally sitting in that is important for a stand-up comedian as much as it is for someone giving a speech, or a CEO, is actually being in the moment and being present to understand, like, okay, what do I want to create now? And, this is the most important moment in our lives right now, because we're here. And it is for your listeners too. because they're here spending their time. They could do anything they want. They can make whatever meaning they want from this podcast. My hope is that they begin to think about their life exponentially and think about how they can get on that path, whether they read my book or take my course or whatever. There's many different paths to this. I'm just going to create a million of those. So eventually some of those people are going to adopt my method because I'm going to persistently determined to actually create that. I have the passion and purpose to do that. So that's, part of my overall goal.
That's incredible. I love how you're so mission and purpose driven, and it's I could hear it and see your enthusiasm. What is a piece of advice you have for entrepreneurs who are just starting, or someone or what is a piece of advice you have for our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes. I mean, I think I've given quite a few little pieces, but if I were to boil down to thinking big, is understand that Mark Zuckerberg, he started Facebook, did not think that it was going to have 3 billion people on his platform. He really was just like, I'm going to solve this problem, really his own kind of personal social problem at Harvard. And, he got, 1,000 people on that. And then he slowly, rolled that out through other Ivy Leagues and whatnot, and eventually got the attention of the world and kind of took off. But every step of the way is to not get so much caught up in your goals. I think, part of what we do at my coaching program is goals are great, but we're going to exceed your goals. There's going to be a point that your goals sound small. Right now, get a goal that sounds big enough. And then the most important thing about goals is to create the right habits. So many entrepreneurs, and I've been entrepreneur in residence at Singularity University and ASU and Thunderbird, and met with students and, even in libraries with, people coming off the streets with ideas. And, part of it is create the habits that will make you successful. And if you do that, whatever goal you thought was big will eventually become small. Like 1 million exponential leaders will be a small goal someday for me. Right now, it still sounds big and still sounds out there. And I love it, because it's uncomfortable saying. In fact, I was telling someone this, and I actually said 1,000 exponential entrepreneur. And I was like, oh no, I was like, I see my mind was holding me back. But when I'm getting more and more comfortable saying that, but I think the important part is every day to create the habits. What are the habits? And really analyze your habits of how you're spending your time, because a lot of people can daydream and a lot of people can think big, but it comes down to what are the habits that are actually going to do that? And that's picking up the phone. That's, sending emails. That's calling people. That's going to conferences. That's doing things, whatever it is in your industry or whatever you're wanting to solve. It's, for yourself, it's having podcasts, right? It's, eventually we know podcasts, the more you have, there comes an audience, you start growing, you hit the exponential curve. Some of the biggest popular, Joe Rogan, I mean, he's like on podcast number 4,000 or whatever, so it's just a matter of he has more content. You can say the same for Howard Stern. He was on 5 hours a day or whatever before, Joe Rogan kind of overtook him. But those all things are, part of a journey that you realize if you put the practice in, you experiment, you put the hours in. And I'm sure some of your users have heard 10,000 hours from Malcolm Gladwell's book, or Michael Simmons, who's a productivity, says 10,000 experiments, get there faster. And we see these really big exponential companies experimenting where Facebook could have 30, 40,000 experiments at one time. Amazon has 10,000 two pizza teams competing with each other to create innovation. So you see this is like, if you embrace some of these exponential ideas, you'll get there faster. So just understand it. All these people started off there. I mean, I always love the memes that go around the internet with Jeff Bezos sitting at a desk where Amazon's kind of spray painted on the side, and has a door as a desk, and that's 1999. So, here we are 22 years later, and candidly, it's, they're moving, I don't know what it is, $400 billion of product. It's market capitalizations in the trillions. I mean, those are all things that, even how big they may have thought, they probably overcome that, So I think that's part of knowing that it is in the daily habits that you have, the daily mindset, the beliefs and attitudes that you have towards your day. I feel that I can coach those and get people into a place where they start to think exponentially, because, the future is very, they can see it in front of them. And then every day you celebrate, and that's, celebrate the little wins, or you learn, And there is no failure. I mean, at the end of the day is just continue to iterate on what you're doing and you'll get better and better. And that's the idea of experimenting. And so, I mean, if anything, it's just staying persistent and determined. And okay, you'll have to pivot along the way. Nobody gets it right out of the gate. As an entrepreneur in residence, I've had a lot of people pitch me ideas. And the only thing I said certain for your pro forma and your business ideas is that it will change. So just like it is the world. And I think that's what I'm embracing by Exponential and the rhodium rule and thrivability is this idea that no matter what you think, the world's going to get bigger and, it's going to change faster than you are expected it. And we're on that exponential curve of change just because of all these different technologies that we're not able to slow it down and we won't. We just need to jump on the journey and find our place.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. What is your favorite business book? You've name dropped a bunch of books during this conversation, but if you had to choose one book that you think everyone in the audience should read, which book is it?
That's a good question. There's too many to name one. I would say. I mean, I hate taking.
Or give me a handful that you think would benefit our audience.
I think Peter Diamandis, who is one of the founders of the X Prize and Singularity University, he's wrote Bold, Abundant, a bunch of different books that talks about this world. Salim Ismail, who wrote Exponential Organizations. Those are kind of books in my space. Asrav built an exponential view. All of these kind of talk about it. And I think where I'm embracing the most and where my focus is I really feel it's the future. What we've done so far is we have leaders we've taught linear leadership, and linear leadership will not last. And we're seeing it every day. These linear leaders that have been on this kind of straight path that maybe they're slightly growing, but the call to the new world, is really this exponential is how do you embrace change change you've never seen before. And that's where change is 4xing every 5 years. So if we think, the amount of change that we've seen in the last 5 years, we're going to have 4x that in the next 5 years, just because it's on an exponential curve. So most of my, thought process goes around that. I think the other is around the hero's journey, which there's been hundreds of books written around the hero's journey, from screenplay writing books by Robert McKee to, all the Stoic philosophers. Ryan Holiday writes a lot of books. Where all of a sudden what I realize is this ancient wisdom matches modern science. We think that we're so, all this, advice that was given 2,000 years ago is actually as applicable today as it was then. And then I just think, learning about technologies is important, and just the accelerated pace of those. And the reality is exponential leaders are going to, guide our way to some of these places. So I look forward to, I already have these conversations, working with the companies I do around, making very, very big decisions and understanding that, you will make mistakes and it'll cost you money. It's the fact that you get back and you continue to work towards it. So there's a variety of different books and courses, but in the end, I've spent $600,000 on courses and boiled it down to create this XMBA program and then this coaching program that really guides all these different courses and brings them together. Because I think, what you see is you start to synthesize that a lot of these materials have the same thought process. And that's where I use the hero's journey as a analogy, because what you realize is all through time, every great story was really written on this hero's journey process of, someone learning, presented a challenge, they overcame it, and they came back and taught it. Well, that's the same as if you're going to become a coach, you're going to be an exponential leader or whatever it is. It's also how we learn. We learn by doing and teaching others better than we ever do by listening or, watching something or whatever. So all that's kind of built into this XMBA. And, I have a list of literally hundreds of books that I recommend. And I'd be glad to kind of share some of that with you after the podcast and send something over for viewers. But there's too many to count, because I think reading is one of the most essential things for exponential growth too.
Absolutely. Well, Aaron, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Where can our audience get in touch with you?
Yeah, on Instagram, Aaron Bear, AARONBARE. Aaron Bear at aaronbear.com is my email. aaronbear.com is my website. You can find me at exponentialtheory.com. Obviously, you can buy the book to learn more, Exponential Theory, on Amazon. But yeah, I mean, I'm very open. I always challenge that. I did this with all my students. I said, I'm going to give you my information, and 99% of you won't use it. And this is your call to action. If you want an opportunity to be exponential, this is the opportunity. So if you embraced any part of this conversation, I'd love to continue it with my team and really help you grow to be exponential yourself, so we can start to solve some of these big challenges.
Awesome. I'll put all this in the show notes so everyone that's listening can reach out to Aaron directly. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a pleasure having you.
All right. Thanks, Vijay. Pleasure.